starting podcast. Dr. Terry Wahls,
Hey,
thank you so much for making time to do this. I appreciate you.
thank you. I always love chatting with you. It's lots of fun.
I wanted to start off with a very simple, uncomplex, basic elementary question. What the heck is a mitochondria?
So mitochondria are really ancient bacteria that were engulfed by larger bacteria about 3 billion years ago. And because those ancient bacteria could generate adenosine triphosphate or ATP more efficiently with the oxygen, that ancient organism really thrived and did very, very well. And it would eventually evolve through random mutations over billions of years into multicellular organisms. Over all of that time, uh, because we had these mitochondria that let us generate energy more efficiently, we could tolerate that poison oxygen that was growing in the air. And we could evolve into multicellular organisms, which allowed us to develop into fish and then reptiles and amphibians and, of course, mammals, which eventually evolve into humans.
And how does that relate to a layman, simple-minded person like myself? How do I leverage the power of healthy mitochondria
Well,
in my daily life?
so you want to have really great mitochondria because we need them to do everything. And to do that, first thing, you need a lot of fat. If you remember from biology that you took during high school, these mitochondria are little ovals with a lot of squiggles in the middle. All those squiggles are cell membranes, and the cell membranes require fat. So now we need omega-3 fat because we can't make that. So that's in wild fish, grass-fed meats. We need omega-6 fats, and those are in nuts and seeds. And we need cholesterol. That's a big part of membranes as well. So we need some cholesterol. If you take cholesterol completely out of your diet, you drive your cholesterol down too low, you can't make those membranes. Without healthy membranes, you can't have healthy mitochondria. You also need B vitamins. And depending on your genetics, you might need activated B vitamins. And we need minerals, things like zinc and magnesium. And so this is one of the reasons I'm so bullish on oysters, on mussels, on liver, on heart. That's really a great supply for all of those things. B vitamins, zinc, magnesium. They'll have some of the omega-6 fats. They'll have more omega-3 fats. You'll probably still need to have some nuts and seeds to get those omega-6 fats.
So I would love part of an intention of this conversation for the sake of the podcast. I think it'd be interesting for it to be like a masterclass of sorts on strengthening and developing our nervous system,
Yeah.
and specifically in relation to your history with multiple sclerosis, which is, from my understanding, it's like an autoimmune disease that breaks down the connective tissue around nerves, the myelin sheath,
Yeah.
and then that creates like a disruption of the mind-body connection, and everything goes haywire. If you don't have that conductivity within those nerve cells, problems start popping off. And so with you, and I probably misspoke, so please clear up what the heck that is.
I'll fix the boo-boos.
But there's two things that I'm curious about. One, anytime I hear the term autoimmune disease, I have all these random question marks of like, what does that mean? Like, why would the body attack itself?
Yeah.
And so that's one lane that I find endlessly interesting that I'd love to discuss.
Yeah.
So maybe we can just start with that. Like, what is an autoimmune disease?
So an autoimmune disease is when we think the immune system has begun attacking the self. And so this happens, and the sequences are, first you have the genetics that make you vulnerable. There are about 200 to 300 different genes that increase the risk of getting an autoimmune problem. Each individual gene probably increases your risk by about 1%, so not very much. The next thing that happens is that you had an infection. And we know that there are 16 different viruses and bacteria that increase the risk of infection. And we're talking about things like Epstein-Barr virus. 95% of us have had the Epstein-Barr virus. And things like Lyme disease, chlamydia, and the coronavirus. And now I want everyone to think about the COVID-19 pandemic that's, we've all been dealing with for the last 2 years. And many of us, if not most of us, have had the coronavirus, the COVID infection. And so that increases the risk for developing an autoimmunity. But it won't necessarily make you have an autoimmune problem. So what are the other environmental factors? And those are things like the foods you eat, toxins you've been exposed to, early life stress, ongoing psychological stress, inactivity, vitamin D, and the more environmental factors that are haywire, that they are really the accelerants that will make it more likely that your autoimmune processes will flare into an overt autoimmune disease. The immune system, Erin, is so important for repairing the wear and tear. I know you're very keen on strength training, and so am I. I think that's vital. And as we're strengthening ourselves, we have a little damage to our muscle cells, our bones, and our ligaments. That our immune cells come in, clean up the damage, and rebuild a stronger muscle cell, tendon, ligament, and bone. That's how we get stronger. That's how we have nice, strong, dense bones. But if we have an infection that we didn't completely clear, and we have all these other environmental factors that are keeping the immune system overly active, then I can begin through a process called molecular mimicry, attacking some of my cellular structures, my tissues. And in my case, I was attacking my brain and my myelin. And we also know I had some autoantibodies, low-level positive ANA, about 5 years before the MS was diagnosed.
Is there any, I believe we may have spoken about this before, but is there any reasonable research or suggestions around any type of psychosomatic component to autoimmune disease? And
Well,
just
that's a really great question because people will know that they're not feeling quite right. They may have a little more anxiety, a little more low mood, depression, maybe a little bit more fatigue. They go see their physician. Physician does an exam, can't find anything. Checks some screening labs, can't find anything. Says, you're just stressed, or you're too busy. You've got kids now. You're trying to juggle your kids, your family life, work life, and you begin to think like, is this all in my head? Am I being sort of psychosomatic? And that goes on for several years. And people will have these subtle, progressively more troublesome symptoms 5 to 10 years before their systemic autoimmune disease is diagnosed. And having anxiety or depression is one of those prodrome conditions that if you have that, you are more likely to have trouble. So, did I answer your question, Erin, about why the autoimmune process begins?
Yeah, for sure. And I just am so curious of like, the suicide and self-harm and people having,
Yeah.
physical manifestations of injuring themselves, taking a
You know,
knife, cutting themselves, like these different things. It's like, it seems almost like at a broader, grosser level that could be placed into some bucket of autoimmune in a way, which I'm
yeah,
probably misspeaking and
but
probably offending someone,
so
but
I've been working on developing another autoimmune course, and so that got me into reading more literature. And we know that anxiety, suicide, uh, um, depression, they have some very interesting um, biochemical issues. They have excess inflammation in the brain. They have excess oxidative stress. The mitochondria are strained. And when the mitochondria get strained, you can end up with the mitochondria basically committing suicide. And I've often wondered if that's beginning to happen, does that release some signals that drive the organism to kill itself? I don't know. I think it's also interesting. I did grand rounds with one of my colleagues in psychiatry many years ago, and I was quite impressed during that grand rounds with the parallels between schizophrenia and multiple sclerosis. Higher incidence of gluten sensitivity, excess inflammation. They're enhancing lesions on the MRI in schizophrenia.
Wow.
I have my father's sister had schizophrenia, and so I realized that, did she have gluten sensitivity? She had seizures as well, which can sometimes be exacerbated by gluten sensitivity. Was the schizophrenia related to the schizophrenia? I don't know. But I think I certainly could have had schizophrenia instead of MS. And so I'm like, wow. And, MS hasn't been easy, but it's way better than schizophrenia.
Yeah. And then getting into things like regional pain syndrome or fibromyalgia or, anhedonia, or there's different, like the way that we regulate pain in the body is very mysterious. And so I've had at this point most of like the world's leading experts around pain, and most everyone kind of eventually comes up to a summation where it's like it's subjective. We see a lot of trends and consistencies, and but as far as like what is pain,
So
I don't think we really know what pain
that is
is. And a
a
lot
big conversation in MS because pain is a big part of the MS experience. And the definition that the MS experts use is pain is a noxious perception as experienced and described by the person experiencing it. And so, my response there is whatever sensory disturbance that you have, we have a range where that sensory information is useful to us, whether it's light, sound, pressure, temperature awareness. But if you dial up the amplitude of that information coming to my brain, it becomes intolerably painful, whether it is light or sound or temperature or pressure. Our brain can amplify, the spinal cord can amplify those signals to make them intolerable. With MS, when I try to explain trigeminal neuralgia, it's sort of like the information on my trigeminal nerve has been amplified. It's sort of like having a seizure of information. So I get this very intense jolt of information up to my brain that I perceive just as this intolerable pain. When it's really ramped up, what is wild, Aaron, is the world becomes white. I can't see anything. I am blinded by pain. And so I completely understand that. And if I'm standing, my knees will weaken, and I've collapsed to the ground because of the intensity of the pain.
Wow. And so within that, so the trigeminal nerve, also known as the fifth cranial nerve, it innervates quite a bit of the face, right?
Yeah, a
So like the
lot of the face.
masseter, the temporalis.
So it starts here at my temporal region. It goes across my cheeks down to my jaw. So I'll feel the pain behind the eye, across my face, around the jaw. A breeze will trigger, when it's turned on, a breeze triggers it, light triggers it, sound triggers it, swallowing triggers it, talking triggers it. And so I had 27 years of relentlessly worsening episodes, relentlessly worsening levels of pain.
Hmm.
But what's interesting, Aaron? Now, actually, I view my trigeminal neuralgia as a very useful bit of information because now I feel like I have this very, very sensitive look at how my brain is functioning and is my brain inflamed or not? Because if my sensory sensation on my face is a little off, I'm like, okay, this is not good. And I know that the inflammation in my brain is turning back up, and I have to do something about it. If I don't have any pain in my face, no abnormal sensation, I know that there'll be no enhancing lesions on my MRI. I know that everything is very quiet for my MS. And actually, I've taught my
So
neurologist that now too.
yeah, and so why I think it's such a relevant conversation for any person, not a person that's dealing with any particular autoimmune disease or anything of the sort, is someone in your position kind of acts as like a canary in the coal mine. I think for people that may have minor versions of inflammation around their fill in the blank thing, nerves or some
Yeah.
type of manifestation of maybe idiopathic pain. There was like, we just don't know why you hurt. I've heard of the suggestion of pain being like a request for change. It's like your
Hmm.
body's way of requesting change,
Yeah.
and then from there you unpack the mystery of like, oh, interesting. Is it environmental conditions? Is it some type of psychosomatic, relational perception of the world, relationships with my parents, relationship with myself? Is it some type of intoxicants or endocrine disrupting chemicals that I'm bathing in with my fill in the blank, the various different household products that I'm using? Is it a lack of connection to the ground of some bioelectric conversation? Is it a lack of movement? The right type of movement is more of a mechanical conversation. But in particular, in relation to this, I think coming back into like, how do we care for our nervous system? What's the
Yeah.
nervous system 101? Like, how do we come back and say, like, maybe there's some, I mean, ultimately everything is nervous
It
system,
all comes
but
back
how do
there.
we come back and start to support our nervous system from whichever realms you think are most valuable? Nutrition, obviously a big one, but I'm
Yeah.
sure there's many
Yeah.
prongs to that conversation.
So we think of it in two big buckets. What do I want to add to the environment that I'm lacking, and what do I need to remove that is harmful? And it's easier to start adding than it is to start removing. So in terms of diet, I sort out, is the person a meat eater or not a meat eater? Yeah, and if they're not a meat eater, then I sort out, is that for spiritual reasons, and that's fine. I'll honor that. If it's not for spiritual reasons, then we'll talk about why meat may be very helpful. So I want to be sure they have enough protein. I have to be sure they have enough fat, because I already mentioned that we need the omega-3, omega-6 cholesterol. I want to be sure that they have plenty of B vitamins, coenzyme Q, creatine, carnitine. Yeah, and so we talk about the key nutrients. Most Americans, Aaron, um, have a, a whole lot of added sugar, a whole lot of processed foods, very few vegetables. Most will have sufficient protein. If they're vegetarian, they may not be having sufficient protein. And so we work to get them to ramp up their non-starchy vegetables. Then we talk about taking out the sugar, the processed added foods. And I encourage a trial of a gluten-free, dairy-free diet, because for those who have a psychological or neurological problem, I want to be sure that unrecognized gluten sensitivity is not part of their problem. And so I encourage them to go gluten-free, dairy-free, and if we do that, I try to have them understand that if you're going to do this, decide when you're going to do it. Um, Pick a start date, but actually go gluten-free. Being 50% gluten-free or 90% gluten-free and still having occasional gluten, if you're gluten sensitive, will keep that inflammation up. And you won't be able to see, okay, did going gluten-free make a big difference? So that's the first thing that we work on. Now, I have some folks who will say, doc, that's too hard. I can't do that. But they're ready to add stress reduction. So then we negotiate a stress reducing practice. Or they may be ready to add a movement practice. And we talk about what's possible given their physical conditions and their reality.
Something that I think is interesting is all the different nutritional dogmas, I think you could
Oh,
say.
yeah, yeah,
And so within that, I think, do you get a new book, or you listen to a new podcast, or
yeah,
you meet someone that you find inspiring and you find out that they're vegan, or they're keto, or they're carnivore, or they're
yeah,
paleo, or they're
yeah,
whatever, and then you're like, this is the way. And I think it's interesting with you, one of the things that you suggest, upon reverse engineering how to build back your
yeah,
nervous system and the myelin, you went instead of using the medications that you were getting, which I don't know, to what degree you continued or stopped using the
yeah,
medications, but you extracted out, you reduced back, and said, like, well, okay, what is actually are the building blocks of these medications, and how can I
yeah,
find what's in here through my
yeah.
my food? And a part of that goes against many other dietary dogmas, which is it's a very confusing world for a modern person that's trying to just eat a reasonable diet.
So in my journey, I did a very low fat vegetarian diet. It looks like the McDougall diet or a Swank diet, and uh, continued to get relentlessly downhill. I adapted the paleo diet and formed the AIP diet and went relentlessly downhill. I added supplements based on what I was reading the basic science, and I slowed my decline. And of course, I was very, very grateful. At that point in my life, what I had learned was when you got into the progressive phase of the illness, that you were just going to go downhill. You were not going to get function back. So I was thrilled to be slowing things down. And over time, I'd get a longer list of supplements. I took the functional medicine course on neuroprotection. I had a longer list of supplements. I had 17 that I was taking. And I'm slowing my decline. And I totally accept that I'm not going to get better, but slowing my decline, that was worth a lot to me. I could still take a few steps. I could still use my hands. And I knew I was on track to become bedridden, demented, probably have trigeminal neuralgia term permanently on. And I was just trying to push that as far into the future as I could. And then when I had this aha, and Aaron, it's really sort of embarrassing that it took me this long to have this aha. It's like, what if I redesign my paleo diet? Because I thought the science behind the paleo diet made sense. But what if I redesign that based on trying to maximize my intake of these 17 supplements I was taking in the food supply? So that took me a couple more months of research to figure out what I should be eating. And I started that new way of eating on December 26, 2007. And when I did that, I could not sit up. I'm so weak, I can't sit in a regular chair. If I try sitting in a regular chair, if I go longer than 10 minutes, I'm so exhausted that I have to lay flat on my back, and I can't work the rest of the day. So I mean, I'm seriously deconditioned and seriously weak. I can do a little tiny 10-minute mat exercise that I was still doing every day because I knew I had to exercise. When I started this new way of eating, I had the list of all these foods that I knew I should be eating. And by the way, liver and heart were in that list, and oysters and mussels were in that list. And a lot of greens and cabbages and colorful fruits and vegetables, beets, and mushrooms, a variety of mushrooms. As everyone knows, like it was shocking. A month later, I'm like, my energy's better, my mental clarity is improving. And my physical therapist says, Terry, I think you're getting stronger, and he's advancing my exercises. And then I realized, it's been a while since my face has been zinging, so I'm having less pain. And then, of course, 6 months later, I get on my bike for the first time, and it's remarkable. And it's at that moment, that I understand that the current, when I bike around the block, and my big 16-year-old boy who's 6'5", he's crying. My 13-year-old daughter, she's crying. Jackie, my wife, she's crying. I'm crying. And of course, I cry even now talking about that, because you see, it was at that moment that I understood the current understanding of MS was incomplete. And who knows how much recovery might be possible. Because when you have a progressive neuroinflammation or neurodegeneration, part of accommodating the fact you have this terrible diagnosis is you let go of the future. And you just take each day as it unfolds. So even though I'd been walking around, first with my walking sticks and then without my walking sticks in the neighborhood, I didn't know what that really meant. It wasn't until I rode my bike that I understood, who knew how much recovery might be possible. And that in fact, I might, I might get close to normal. Well, normal for me, whatever that might be. And it really changed how I started thinking about disease and health. It would change the way I practice medicine. And I start wanting to talk to my patients about this radical insight that I had, that what they ate was really, really important, and what they did every day for exercise was really, really important. But I couldn't just give them these long lists of all these foods I was eating. I had to create a digestible way to teach these concepts that they could remember and they could implement at home. And that's basically how the Wahls protocol was born. Like, okay, I got to make this something that I can teach, because when I'm staffing residents with in their continuity of care clinics, as the faculty person, I get 5 minutes with a patient, and so I got to be able to inspire them, and teach them a lesson that they could remember when they get home in less than 5 minutes. So I got to digest this down to the most critical essence of how to get these nutrients that I identified as critically important. And so I focused in my VA clinics on the foods to add first. And so that was 3 cups of greens. So a plate full of greens, you can measure it raw, and you could cook them. It's going to shrink down, or you just have this really big salad that covers your whole plate. And then a plate full of cabbage, onion, mushroom family kinds of vegetables, and a plate full of deeply colored kinds of vegetables and berries. And it's very funny, Erin. My vets would say, like, "Doc, is that per month or per week?" And we'd laugh. No, that's per day. And so then we'd have to have a little conversation about how to help them reimagine their diets. But I was actually, my residents were very impressed, because about half of the people that I saw radically changed their diets, began to eat these radical things known as vegetables, and they had their blood pressure improve, blood sugars improve, moods improve. And when we saw them back, we're cutting their medicines doses down, simplifying, often over time, able to eliminate medicine after medicine. So the key is you add the food first, then we talk about taking away, because I want to stress this is not about being hungry. So you eat all the things that I want you to eat. So you get your 9 cups in. And then we work on getting rid of the sugar, the processed foods. And then we have the conversation if they want to try going gluten-free, dairy-free for a couple weeks and see how that impacts them. And most of the people who did that would come back and say, you know what, Doc, you're right. That gluten was a problem. It bit me in the ass. So I'm staying gluten-free.
And so those foods, particularly if a person does want to bolster, support the healthy function of their nervous system, it's sulfurous foods is one of the categories you'd say. Like what's like the for a person, and you have your whole book,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Wahls Protocol, and you have like all the information is on the internet. But for people listening, if they're at a grocery store and they're like, yeah, I want to try this, eating to support my nervous system. What's the
Yeah, let's go for that. So we're gonna have you go get a bunch of greens. A wide variety of greens will be good. So kale, spinach, romaine, lettuce, and then parsley would be basil. So green leafy things. Then in terms of the cabbage family, so again, a huge number of vegetables fit in the cabbage family, but cabbage, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, radishes, turnips, rutabagas, and turnips, rutabagas, radishes are very pleasant raw, so that's a great way to start. Cauliflower, very pleasant raw. Broccoli, broccolini. I think they're very pleasant raw. Great steamed. You could pour a bunch of olive oil over them. We have a little cooking class in the Therapeutic Lifestyle Clinic, and we would pass around kale or dandelion greens and have them eat a little bit, and they'd say like, "Oh my God, Doc, that is so bitter. There's no way I could eat that." I said, "Yep, we understand. Incredibly bitter." And then if we had people who were okay with eating bacon, we'd fry up bacon to the desired level of doneness, take the bacon out, chop it up, throw this intolerably bitter green in the skillet, stir it up until it wilted. That's about a minute. Add the chopped bacon back, and then we serve that. And my vets would say, like, "Oh my God, that's delicious." So it was a great way to show that you could take a very bitter vegetable. If we cook it in fat, that calms the bitterness. If it still seemed a little bit bitter, you could add a little vinegar or lime juice, lemon juice to bring the pH down a little bit, and that'll take care of the bitterness. And then it will be delicious. If they couldn't eat pork, then we would use ghee instead.
and so within that, then it comes into the nutritional dogma battles
Oh
of
yeah,
what about the lectins and the
yeah,
phytates and the defense chemicals that plants have, because they don't want to be eaten, and they don't have legs, they
yeah,
don't have
yeah,
guns, so they defend themselves through noxious chemicals. And then it comes into like, well, is there some food preparation like a la Dr. Gundry stuff where it's
yeah.
like maybe you ferment, maybe you pressure cook, maybe you is who's right, who's wrong, like.
Let's talk about evolution in our evolutionary history. So if we go back, um, mammals have been around about 200 million years. Primates have somewhat less. I'm not quite sure when primates showed up on the scene. We were deeply with all of our other primate friends and cousins until about 6 million years ago. Then we separate. 2 million years ago, we're in our genus Homo. And 250,000 years ago, we are Homo sapiens. We figure out cooking 100,000 years ago. And we also figured out fermentation, started having beer, by the way, about 100,000 years ago. And we domesticated plants about 10,000 years ago. We've been eating plants for a very long time, for millions of years as primates. We started eating animals maybe somewhere 2 million years ago, and that let us grow our bigger brains. When we figured out fire and migrated up to northern Europe in the Middle East, we ran into the Neanderthals, had a 100,000-year war, and assimilated them. And we all have some Neanderthal DNA, about 2 to 5%, by the way. And then we migrated throughout Europe, Asia, South Asia, Australia, the Pacific Islands, North America, South America. Humans thrived in diverse climates, diverse ecosystems, eating widely diverse foodstuffs. So anyone who says they have the only diet, the correct diet, is full of shit. Of course, we're all full of shit. But anyone who says that my plan is the only plan is wrong. And if I've ever said that, people should correct me. We can thrive in a wide variety of foodstuffs. Now, for you and for me, we'll have slightly different foodstuffs that will be better for us. And we can look at the research and say, okay, so what kinds of things do we know? From our evolution, I will tell you that we know we have reproductive success eating a wide variety of things. We know from our evolutionary history that our health declines if we eat a lot of sugar, a lot of processed foods, a lot of fast food. So there's very consistent research. And our evolutionary history tells us you eat all that sugar, you eat all that processed food, your health will decline. Then we can have debates over, we do have some societies that are predominantly carnivore and have thrived and have done well. Even those societies still eat a small amount of plant material. I don't know of any society that we have a long evolutionary history of being a vegan or a vegetarian without supplementation. That's going to be difficult. We have a long evolutionary history, and I'll say 250,000 years of eating plants. And by eating plants that do make poisons, and I completely agree with everyone who says there are lectins, they're poisonous, they're noxious to us, but they're hormetic toxins. So by giving my system a little stress, I ramp up the efficiency of my liver, my kidneys, and my metabolic pathways, and I modulate my inflammation. And that's, you and I are big fans of hormetic stress. We do ice baths, we do saunas, we do strength training, we do high intensity interval training. And so eating plants is your hormetic stress, and I think it's very helpful. And for my friends who say, but the plants are full of lectins, so I'm going to eat just carnivore animal products, what they are ignoring is that there are lectins in animal products. The only way to completely avoid lectins is to do a water fast, which you can do for a while, but you can't do indefinitely. You'll die.
What actually is a lectin?
A lectin is a protein with a sugar side chain, and we have them in our cells. They're also known as hemagglutinins. They are present. They're present in meats, in milk. They are present in plants. So you can eat a diet that has lower lectins, and that's why people suggest taking them out of grain, legumes, nightshades out, dairy out. But again, they are present in meat as well.
It seems like, so if a person is already really stressed out and they're underslept and they're overwhelmed and they're all of the things, um, doing a large bout of exercise, it maybe could kind of knock them back into order, but it also could be
Too much.
more just de-stressing,
Yeah.
so as opposed to being in that bucket of eustress or hermetic stress and all the words, it's like, oh, actually this person, you're so frazzled, you
Yeah.
really need to rest. And I wonder if there's a crossover analogy with a person that perhaps really is only able to actually be able to consume
Yes.
animal foods, is perhaps there's some type of deeper gut dysbiosis or some type of autoimmune something, or like a deeper condition there. And then people say, this worked for a very small category of people that were in
Yeah.
this very specific, situation. And then we say, okay, I think this is how everybody should do it. And that's where I'm kind of like, I don't know.
No. Again, our evolutionary history would argue strongly against that. That we've had more societies consume plants and experience terrific health. Will there be some people where a carnivore diet is basically a very potent elimination diet? Um, yes, it may be beneficial. However, even those societies that have been largely vegetarian, largely consuming meat, such as the Arctic dwellers or some of the folks in the Mongolian deserts, we have many more societies that or have plants at least as a part of their diet.
Hmm.
And those societies in the Arctic North, in the Mongolian desert, they're eating very different animal products than what are available to most people today. Most meat here in the United States is factory farmed. It's not organic. And so, again, that's a potential problem. And I would also make the observation that, and I've seen a number of people who've gone on the paleo diet, found it to be helpful, wanted to go back to reintroducing plants into their diet, and they had tremendous difficulty reintroducing plants. It took them a very long time to migrate. It had to be very slow, very gradual. It took them many months to get back to a paleo diet. And so we don't know yet for whom the carnivore diet might be helpful. I've been in conversation with the champions of the carnivore diet. We have offered to help them write up a case report, a case series of who've been helped. They've not been interested in doing that. And I mean, I'm very disappointed because I would like to see a case report and a case series so I could know who has helped, what are the side effects, who should not do a carnivore diet. And to me, that if we're going to ever advocate for that, we need to have case reports, case series, and then you can do a clinical trial, single arm trial, to grow an effect size. Then you can start doing randomized trials. I've had meetings with them trying to explain why I'd like to help support them to do that. And so far, they've not been interested.
Would you recommend, back to the previous question, would you recommend any particular style of preparation of some of these foods that may have defense chemicals, such as spinach and kale, etc., or
Sure.
beans, rice, various different?
So in general, if someone's in good health, their gut is working, what I want them to do is to have a third of their food raw, a third cooked, and a third fermented. If we think that someone has not responded adequately to my version of the paleo diet. Or if they have an autoimmune disease involving their joints, then I recommend basically the Wahls elimination diet. Then I take legumes out, nightshades out, grains out. If they want to use those, then I'd have them use a pressure cooker. The pressure cooker will reduce the lectins. It won't take them down to zero. So it depends on the level of sensitivity and whether a pressure cooker will denature it enough.
I wonder, and then I guess finishing up the nutritional aspect, then I want to get to other parts. From what about protein and fat? You mentioned
Yeah,
ghee, you mentioned lard and such, but how much is too much? There's now presently, like, the trends are so cute,
yeah,
I think, to watch. It's like no carbs. You don't need, all you need is protein. That is like,
yeah.
well, fat's fine. You have a whole stick of butter in the morning with your coffee. That's great. Like, oh no, that's actually not that good.
So
Like,
again, it'll depend on your underlying health factors. Are you diabetic? Do you have APO4? And so those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about. Uh, um, do you have known heart disease? And for those people, I move things lower down, and I'll want them to have a lower total cholesterol. Do they have more anxiety, depression, a history of issues with infections? Then I'm going to want their cholesterol to be a bit higher. And are they trying to be in a ketogenic diet? Then we need to have more fat intake. In general, I really like olive oil. I prefer that be cold, and I encourage people to have 2 tablespoons of olive oil to 4 tablespoons of olive oil every day for its health benefits. If you're going to, if you're worried about fat, saturated fat, then I would rather you cook, bake, braise, that is, simmer in broth or water, and then add your olive oil afterwards. If you're not worried about saturated fat, then I would use lard, chicken fat, duck fat, bacon fat to fry things.
who should be worried about saturated fat?
If you have diabetes, if you have a family history of dementia, then I'm thinking that you're more likely to have the APO4. Um, if you have a family history of early heart disease.
All right. And then what about movement? What about all of the bioelectric conversations,
Yeah,
grounding, being
yeah,
bombarded by EMF and dirty electricity, and living in a high-rise building, and having your cell phone pressed up against your genitals for 80% of the day, and then under your pillow while you go to bed? Like, how does that spill
yeah.
into our relationship with our nervous system?
Well, let's talk about movement first. Yeah, I think if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. So many of the listeners may have heard about broke have broken something, and so they've had their arm or their leg in a cast. And when the cast comes off, you'll see that the muscles have severely atrophied because they weren't being used. It's so important that we exercise. It is so important that we move. In getting movement going is just a vital part of um, healthy aging, a vital part of managing any kind of autoimmune condition, whether it's inflammatory bowel disease, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, or even a skin condition such as psoriasis. Now I'm going to move over to the question about grounding. I think thinking about again our evolutionary history, we spent millions of years walking barefoot on the ground. Then we got around to making shoes out of hide that would still uh, conduct electrons, particularly when wet. And then we got into synthetic footwear, so that doesn't conduct electrons. Then we moved inside, and then we have fewer and fewer electrons. So this absence of grounding is a relatively new phenomenon. I don't. The health consequence of the absence of grounding, I don't know. I'm not as familiar with that research, but from an evolutionary standpoint, to me, it makes immense sense that there's a lot of benefit from walking on Earth. I personally love to go out barefoot, walk in snow, or in grass, dewy grass. And I know many of our elders will tell us that walking around barefoot is in the morning on dewy grass was part of their daily rituals. The question about EMF and dirty electricity, again, I'm not as familiar with that research, so I'm going to take a pass on that. I will certainly make the observation that personally, I like not having my phone in my bedroom. I like having it in my bathroom, and I like having the router turned off at night. My perception is that I sleep better with those circumstances. And I certainly encourage my patients to not have their phone in their bedroom, not only for the EMF, just to be sure that you aren't scrolling at night, that you stop, and that you have time away from your devices. And I encourage my patients to turn their routers off at night.
Yeah. And then another fundamental component to cellular, mental, emotional, nervous system health, again, it's all the same thing, is light. And one of the things, I believe the highest concentration of mitochondria exists within the retina of the eye.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, maybe that doesn't really matter. Maybe, I mean, it probably matters in some ways, but in relation to this conversation, I'm not sure how much it matters. But exposing our eyes and our skin to light, how does that relate to the health of our nervous system?
Think about this through our evolutionary history. We had 200 million years outside in the sunlight 24/7. And when we became primates and Homo sapiens, we're still outside. Being inside all the time is relatively new. The amount of radiation from the sun that is in the visible light spectrum is a relatively small band. There's the ultraviolet, and part of the ultraviolet light that we can't see is responsible for making vitamin D, so we know that's vital. And then on the red and the infrared, we know that the infrared is important in helping us make melatonin so we can sleep at night. If our retina doesn't get light, our retina is not as healthy. And there are certainly scientists that, and I agree with them, that if we aren't getting light into our eyes, our circadian rhythm is disrupted. So, in the circadian rhythm is speaks through my pituitary to my thyroid, to the sex glands, to the adrenals, and to my ability to sleep at night. I have to have light, and I need light in the morning, preferably soon after sunrise, to have that circadian rhythm clock set appropriately. So I think light is vitally important. I want my patients and my Wahls Warrior tribe to get themselves outside so they can have light for the circadian rhythm. And does that light help our cytochrome pathways in our mitochondria work more effectively? Yes. Do we actually photosynthesize? No. And how important is that light hitting our skin for our mitochondrial function? I don't know that we know, but we absolutely know that it's vital for our mood, and it's vital for our ability to sleep, and it's vital to have the circadian rhythm that sets through our pituitary, which then influences all of the other endocrine glands in our body.
Thank you so much for. I always so much enjoy our conversations. I know you have to run
Oh my
in
goodness,
like
yeah,
10 minutes or so.
yeah.
I feel a part of what we didn't touch on so much in the conversation that I think is a massive component to everything. So says science and just like general logic is relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of those that the things that's because it's not as easy to measure and have empirical data. Although there is data, there's like the longest longitudinal study done in Harvard started like 1938 or something, and it's still going on. And from my understanding and
Yeah,
suggestion is that the highest, most consistent factor for the health and longevity and reduction of all-cause mortality of the people within that study was the quality of their relationships. And then if
mm-hmm.
you look statistically, as culture is seemingly getting a lot like quote unquote like less healthy, our relationships, at least statistically speaking, people report
Yeah,
being a lot more consistently lonely, report not knowing who the hell their neighbors are, not feeling known by their neighbors, not having, very many meaningful relationships. They might know people, quote unquote, know people, but actually feeling seen, connected, heard, a part of a tribe. That's medicine,
that is huge.
and
Absolutely
it's
huge.
something that doesn't get spoken about as much because you don't like measure the quality of your relationships in a cup and say, "Hi, I had 2 liters of relationships for 3
Absolutely.
weeks, and this is what
And,
happened."
and what we saw in my lifestyle clinic is that putting groups together where people could talk to one another about their shared experience helped them be far more successful with changing their diet and self-care routine because they could
Mhm.
talk to each other about what was working, what was not working, what their troubles were, and what their successes were. Just
Yeah,
so exciting.
yeah. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Now,
Do you have anything else?
oh yeah, I want to be sure that
Yeah.
we mentioned for your tribe that we are recruiting for new study efficacy of diet on quality of life. That's
Cool.
for people with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, people who have ages 18 to 70. We'll randomize them to a ketogenic diet, a paleo diet, or usual diet, and in the usual diet group will get a monthly email from us with some tips and resources to help them reduce their added sugar, processed foods, and eat more vegetables. And we'll be recruiting probably for another year. And we have 110 more people to get into our study. So if you have relapsing remitting MS, or if you know someone from friends or family acquaintances that have relapsing remitting MS, have them reach out to us. Links to that our screening documents are at terrywahls.com, and you'll see that in the banner across the top. And Aaron, I'll send you the link so that you could include it with your show notes.
Great. Is there any other place that people should go to
I'll look for
learn more
that.
about your work? Obviously,
Oh yeah,
get the book Well's Protocol. Is there anything else would be relevant for folks to go deeper?
yeah. So go to terrywahls.com/diet. That's a one-page handout. That's great for the refrigerator. We have a autoimmune intervention mastery course that we've put thousands of people through that has really helped them transform their lives to understand these concepts in a much deeper detail. In November, we have a 2-day online virtual seminar on healthy aging. We have those details are at terrywalls.com as well.
Great. I saw a bunch of people pop up in the messages in the Instagram live saying they'd like to do the study. So I'm sure that will fill up very quickly.
Oh, good.
And yeah, and yeah, thank you so much. I so greatly appreciate your friendship and just your existence, the way that you
Well,
show up in the world. And yeah, I just appreciate you.
I want to come do an ice bath at your place again. That was so much fun.
I know. I'm in Austin now, so it's even easier. It's
Yeah.
slightly hotter than LA, which is unexpected, but yes. Yeah, let me know when you're in Austin, Texas. I've got the sauna and ice plunge all set up. And
That'll be great.
yeah. Yeah. Once again, appreciate you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in on the Instagram, on the IG Live, and thank you for tuning in the podcast. I will see you all next week. Pow.